Hello again, watch friends. Welcome back. I have a growing collection of vintage Seiko watches that I like very much. I enjoy each and every one for different and sometimes similar reasons. However, there are a few that are my favorites. I'd like to share them with you now. The King Seiko 4502-8000. This King Seiko was developed by the Dani division of Seiko to compete head-to-head with the 61GS of their in-house rivals at Suwa. The 61GS, of course, is the lust-worthy early Grand Seiko model. This King Seiko is a high beat, meaning that it purrs along at 36,000 beats per hour. It is generally thought that the higher the movement frequency, the more accurate the watch. The only downside is potentially more wear on the movement, causing more frequent servicing. Just for a brief comparison, here is my 61GS, a 6146-8000 from 1969. It too is a high beat, ticking at 36,000 beats per hour. It has the requisite Grand Seiko emblem on the case back, and just look at that dial. This is a really nice specimen, and I'm thankful I have both the King Seiko and the Grand Seiko from the same era. Grand Seiko sure knows how to do dials, both 50 years ago and now. Anyway, I knew the King Seiko was a looker when I bought it, but in person, I just want to say, wow. Let's take a look. It's a manually wound watch, which I actually like quite a bit. Having to wind the watch periodically allows me a more intimate connection with the piece and some time, albeit brief, to reflect on time, or at least what I plan to do with my time in the next day or so while the watch is powered. This model King Seiko was one of the last of the hand-built movements for the King Seiko line, and was in fact the last 36,000 movements Dani would produce. Many of the King Seikos, and Grand Seikos for that matter, of the era were rated as chronometers, which had a higher level of accuracy compared to watches in the regular or mid-line. Some specs. The diameter is 38 millimeters. The thickness is 9.6 millimeters, rather thin. Lug width is 18 millimeters, a standard, and the lug-to-lug distance is 41.6. Again, comparing it to the 61GS, it is more or less similar, except for the Grand Seiko thickness, which is needed to accommodate the automatic movement on that piece. The 6146-8000 Grand Seiko has a 36.8 millimeter diameter, slightly smaller. The thickness is 12 millimeters instead of 9.6. Lug width is similar, it's 18 millimeters. And the lug-to-lug is 42, about the same. The case of the King is a cushion or pillow design with a polished top and brushed chamfered edge, and the case back is set with a gold KS medallion at center. Many vintage Seiko watches of this era, which had the medallion on the back, are in poor condition, with the medallion highly worn or sometimes not even visible. On this piece, it's almost perfect, which adds to the visual appeal of the watch, at least when it's off the wrist. The case is unpolished with the original finishes intact, and the case back is sharp. This KS from April of 1969 is a rare delight, even by vintage standards. As I understand it, this reference is often seen with a cross-hatched linen dial in white. My dial variation is in matte dove gray sunburst. It's absolutely pristine, and its rich texture appears almost soft to the touch. Notice the finely detailed applied markers and tapered baton hands with black inlay. It is easily the most distinguishable model in the line. This vintage piece has an instant change date. I always like to see how the date rolls over at midnight, since in some ways this is a measure of quality of the movement. I'm fortunate to have found this particular King Seiko specimen. It's unique and rather uncommon, at least in this grade. What a timeless style, and the gray dial really gives it a lot of class. The second watch of this trio is the 6138-0040 chronograph, often called the bullhead. It earned its name because Seiko rotated the movement within the case 90 degrees, putting the chronograph pushers and crown at the 12 o'clock position instead of the 3 o'clock position. As a result, the top of the watch resembles the horns of a bull. The 6138-0040 is not a rare watch, but can be difficult to find in original immaculate condition. These models were produced from the early 1970s until about 1980, and the predecessor, the 6139, was the very first ever automatic chronograph. This particular bullhead version is from July of 1975 and is the less common black dial colorway. The other version, brown and gold, is more common. I recently obtained one of these pieces in the original box and with papers. Here you can see how nice it is, and the added importance of having the full kit makes it really cool. The 6138 line is distinguished by several features. It was the first automatic chronograph to have a vertical clutch and column wheel. The material for the mainspring is more rugged and unbreakable. Seiko called it Diaflex and has used it in many watches over the last few decades. Also, it was the first movement to have Seiko's proprietary anti-shock system called DiaShock. This feature has also become a mainstay in many Seiko models since then. The bullhead chronograph was part of the Seiko 5 family of watches, first introduced in 1969. Let's talk about dimensions. The diameter is 44 millimeters. The height is 16 millimeters, which is tall and makes the bullhead sit high on the wrist. There are no lugs per se, but the distance from top to bottom of the case, not including the crown or pushers, is 45 millimeters. The stainless steel case is brushed and has a screw-down back. Interestingly, the case thickens towards the top, slightly tilting the dial towards the wearer. This actually aids in reading the chronograph. The case asymmetry also extends to the solid link bracelet, since it tapers slightly on the clasp ends of the bracelet. This vintage piece has the original Seiko fishbone stainless steel bracelet. The only non-standard addition is a bracelet extension, so it fits my 7.5-inch wrist. The bracelet has been dubbed the fishbone due to its central spine of vertical links and horizontal scales. This particular bracelet was included in models meant for North America, while JDM versions of the watch had a more traditional oyster bracelet. The clasp is the original Seiko branded fold-over clasp, and fortunately, the clasp does not stick out too much from the bracelet, so it doesn't catch on sleeves. The non-rotating bezel has a tachymeter scale, ubiquitous on many chronographs. Silver markings on a black background make the bezel and scale highly legible. The crystal is Seiko's Hardlex mineral glass, which is a synthetic material and is very resistant to scratching. Another distinctive aspect of this watch is the asymmetric bracelet. The width of the bottom of the case and at the top of the case are different, with the top being wider. This makes normal strap changes a challenge if you want the strap case area to look correct. Now, just a few comments on the dial. The watch has a symmetrical black matte dial with sub-registers for chrono minutes at 3 o'clock and hours at 9 o'clock. These sub-registers are inset, giving a sense of depth to the dial design. Also, the rounded square design of the sub-dials adds visual interest to the dial. Another design feature adding visual interest and readability is the yellow sweep chronoseconds hand. A very subtle touch which shows the attention to detail on this watch is a discrete SUA symbol just above the day date windows. This was a hallmark of Seiko watches of this era. I'm a big fan of subtle features and attention to detail like this. Yet another interesting design decision was to show the day date vertically. My version shows days in either English or Spanish, and once chosen, they remain in that mode as the days progress. As Seiko's second automatic chronograph movement, the automatic 6138 is a slightly newer version of the 6139 movement and adds a couple of useful features. These include being able to set the day and date independently. In the first position, turning the crown in one direction advances the day, and turning it in the other direction advances the date. Manual winding of the watch, and there is no second hand, so therefore there is no hacking. The 6138, which uses a vertical clutch and column wheel, ticks at 21,000 beats per hour. Because of the size and the height, the bullhead is not going to fit under your cuff, which is okay, since the bullhead has no ambitions of being a dress watch. The bullhead is not an everyday wearer, but it is fun to wear, and it's a real conversation starter. The third watch in my trio is the Seiko World Time 6217-7000. The Seiko Watch Company was the official timekeeper of the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, and they decided to introduce a watch in conjunction with and to celebrate the Games. This 1964 Seiko 6217-7000 World Time is an interesting watch since it's not a GMT, more on that later, and not even a traditional second time zone watch. More on that too, shortly. These became available as of March 1964. It was introduced along with the 571X series of chronographs, but was differentiated from the regular models by an Olympic flame embossed on the caseback. The World Time is powered by an automatic 6217 caliber, but with an added GMT hand. The 6217 movement was actually a development of the 603 caliber, which first appeared in 1960, and these 62XX series of movements powered everything from the World Time to the Grand Seikos of the day. There were two dial versions of the watch, a white and a more rare black. This example from November of 1964 has a silvery white linen dial, which is bordered by split bicolor 24-hour track and framed by a matte silver rotating Cities of the World inner bezel with a sleek red trim. 24 time zones represented by cities throughout the world are depicted on the inner bezel, which is accompanied by day-night indicator bezel and distinctive auto-setting GMT hand. This complication is similar to the Rolex GMT that was introduced in 1954, where the fourth hand is connected to the hour hand. The classically shaped case and neatly proportioned lugs provide a proper frame for the dial inside. On my version, the caseback etching has faded after 53 years of wear, and only a slight outline remains of the Olympic torch. The Olympic torch motif was used on the 6217-7000 caseback until October 1964. After that, the Seiko Dolphin appeared on the caseback. Here's what the torch should look like if it wasn't worn off. A few specs: 38mm stainless steel case, snap-on caseback, 19mm lugs, high-domed acrylic glass, 11.5mm thickness, and a 43mm lug-to-lug distance. The inner bezel is turned by the crown, which is at 5 o'clock, like diver's watch, although this is not a diver. It's rated to only 30 meters. So in order to use the World Time function, some effort is required on the part of the wearer. The watch allows you to determine the time in any of 24 time zones around the globe with the use of its rotating inner bezel. Line up a city that's in your current time zone with a 24-hour hand, and you can reference the other time zones using the 24-hour scale. Let me demonstrate. Using the World Time is a 3-step process, and it's really simple. First, ensure the local time is set correctly and that the red GMT hand is pointing to the current hour in 24-hour time. Please allow me to use GMT in quotes because it really isn't a GMT hand. Next, use the crown to rotate the inner bezel to make the GMT hand point to your location. Lastly, like a slide rule, remember those? Follow around the track to the city you want to know the time for and read the time in 24-hour format. So if it's 5 p.m. in New Jersey, that's 1700 in 24-hour format. The GMT hand is pointing to New York, it's Eastern time, and looking at what time it is in Paris, I see that it's 2300 hours, or 11 o'clock, which is correct since Paris is 6 hours ahead of the U.S., at least the Eastern U.S. One way to identify an early 6217 world time are the black GMT hand, the lack of loom on the hour and minute hands, and the large fluted crown. Later versions have a red GMT hand like mine. It appears Seiko only produced the 6217-7000 world time between March and December 1964, making these a very limited production. I especially love the linen dial, which when viewed closely shows really nice detail. So not only is this a great vintage Seiko with an interesting story and in great condition, except for that ghostly torch on the case back, but it's also a limited release. What a fun watch and unique example of Seiko's history. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.